to copy files into it after it's built. I'm just sort of like, okay, I use a Docker file to, I don't know, instantiate it or something.
Oh, so during the build process?
Yeah, it's literally just they're statically in there, and I just need the files to be in there too.
Okay, that's easy.
Oh, that's easy.
It's literally the keyword copy.
Okay, I know. I tried that. I tried copy, then dot, but it still didn't work. Like it was just like, I don't feel like I'm telling your files, whatever. I was like, come on.
Do you have your laptop?
Yeah. You're right.
All right.
Is the Python Meetup always here?
Yeah, Python Meetup is always here. We're always the 4th Tuesday of every month, pretty much every month. And you can always find us at our somewhat new URL, pyorl.org. A bunch of that takes you right to the Meetup page. Live stream is at live.pyorl.org. If you want to speak, it's speak. And our past YouTube streams are at watch. So pyorl. It's just a bunch of forwarding URLs, but it's easier than telling everyone to go to youtube.com/crazycharacterstream because we don't have enough subscribers to get something that actually looks nice live. Yeah.
I remember the days when you could get a custom URL on YouTube just by buying a domain name and verifying it.
It'd be nice. I would love it.
That's how it used to be.
So many great URLs that I could do that for. Okay. Yeah, this is a nice size. Before we start going, just want to say, if you guys, I think, have you been with us before?
No, this is my first time coming here.
All right. I think.
I was late.
So this is Teeps. They're wonderful. They let us be here for free. And they do mobile apps and some web development over there, but it's great. While I'm talking about it, Teeps is looking for a Django contractor who can do 2 weeks of work. Was it 2 weeks of work or 4 hours after work? So time flexible, and I think he's the guy to talk to in the back about that.
About what?
The Django position.
Oh yeah.
Django contract.
Yeah.
Awesome. Either message me directly or go in the Slack channel or contact Ashley Smith at Teeps. All right. So, I wasn't here last time, but we had that wonderful intro to deep learning talk. I heard great things about it. But back around this time, no one brought code in that they're having trouble with or want to go over. I was thinking something that the iOS group did. I want to say either earlier this month or last month, where just have a general iOS help session. But those tend to be larger projects, and we do tend to have more mobile developers in Orlando than a lot of other things. I think the largest ones are mobile, either iOS or Android. We have a good number of .NET and Microsoft shops, and also a decent number of Node. Python tends to be a little thin but far and wide. Not very deep, unfortunately. But I actually want to ask you guys a question, because I was remembering stuff that I enjoyed the most when I first came back to Orlando, which was, even though I have not been nor have ever been a .NET or Microsoft Languages developer, I would go every single week to the .NET groups just happy hour that they do. They still do once a month. If anyone would be interested in that, maybe just bring up people that just want to talk and not necessarily interested in the topic that month. Go out to a bar. The first round of drinks would be paid for, and that kind of thing. I'm trying to think of ways that I could actually use sponsorship from the Python Foundation as an actual supported meetup. If anyone would be interested in something like that. So maybe give some feedback on that maybe later or in the Python channel. But I would love to do that maybe every other month, just as a second meeting that month. So that'd be fun. I think tonight we're pulling double duty with .NET because Microsoft is in town with their Ignite conference, and they wanted to have a special speaker come and talk with them. But that's usually not the case with this one. I think the only I think we've shared on and off a JavaScript meeting here and there, but I don't think a large tech group meets consistently enough on the same date. That's nice. Anyway.
A question. So
yeah.
Is there a Python channel in the old devs?
There is.
Yeah.
And it was actually just blowing up a second ago.
Oh, it's active?
Yeah. So it's an active Python channel. I and a handful of other people start and get notifications whenever there's activity in there. So you post a question in there, we will all come rushing to help, figure out what's going on. Or in this case, as of 14 minutes before we started, post a link. Yeah, there it goes, a little bigger. Talking about how Dropbox pretty much their entire Python 2 code base is now gone. So we're in there. Any questions, we'll be free to ask. There's also the Python developers global group. If we can't answer it, someone will.
There's also a large Python Discord server. It has like 30,000 members.
Yeah.
So.
If you have a Python question, someone on the internet will answer it for you, if they haven't already.
Do you talk with them, or do you
Discord's just like Slack.
I know, but I use it for gaming, so I'm just wondering if you go on the channel and you're talking to 30,000 people. Is it like that?
No. Nobody uses the voice chat and programming servers.
No. Although I think you can, if you meet coordinate with someone beforehand, you can do one-on-one sessions or group sessions for. Honestly, we could use Slack or Discord or anything else to have an interactive meeting virtually.
Yeah.
If anyone ever wanted to. I don't know if that's a paid thing because I haven't heard anyone using it in ODEV.
It's paid for Slack, but free for Discord.
Okay. Or just a hangout, like a Google Hangout or Meet or whatever default one they want people to use nowadays.
You
actually,
also use, I believe, Join Me up to a certain number of users for free.
There are so many, but honestly, if anyone posts in Slack, hey, does anyone have time to do a virtual session to help me figure out this one thing? Because I'm sure someone will, and if not, I probably would, but that's just me. So. Hey, let's just get started. I coincidentally do have a piece of buggy code that we could work on, or we could just create a new project that is buggy to the max, and then look at how we can create a test suite to individually address, fix, and then do end-to-end testing for that terrible project.
Something I've gotten a little confused on. Now that I've retired, I don't put that much work into it anymore. But there were several different Python test frameworks. Which one have you gravitated toward?
So I personally, and we can just get started into this. I'll pull up something I've done kind of half-what in the past. I like using a combination of the standard library unit test and PyTest to actually manage everything. And to just give an example of what that looks like I personally don't really do production stuff ever. But this is a decently used library and service that I've showed off before. So this is the closest thing I have to production. But it was a huge thing for me earlier in the year to take this code that I had written and never had any tests for before and create a comprehensive 100% coverage test suite. That took a very long time for me to do from scratch.
See the screen easier.
Right, I can make it as big as you guys want to see. But let's say we can. What might be simple enough? Actually, what do I have a test for in here? I have a test for everything in one way or another. Okay, let's take a look at this service file. So, use your good Python formatting. Use your module doc strings. I do a couple of commenting here and there. Always use your doc strings. If you're doing Python 3, which you should, do something with annotations, because even if you're not using MyPy or any kind of type checking library, it's always going to make it that much easier to read and understand for people that want to use your code. It's just as an example. We have this service here, and I think when you get these tooltips in there, all of your annotations should show up as is in here. So I wonder if I have one in here. So let's fetch. Actually, there's one. So I'm calling this from the core. You can just look in the tooltip. Because the def valid station string, because it has that string annotation in there, or you could actually just give it a string with a description of what goes there. That's something that any developer that uses tooltips or goes and reads your source code is able to see and understand that much more about what you are expecting it to take. If you want to use something like MyPy, and I think I had talked about this in the past, there is the typing library. So you could do from typing import. So they have any string, byte string. And if you want to do a list of string, the annotation for that would be that list. Actually, no, it's that of string as the annotation. It's still kind of in flux right now with varying levels of support, but even if you're not going to use it programmatically, annotations get removed at, I think at compile time, when they generate the PYC files. They just get put into a Dunder annotations dictionary, and they don't actually live in your code when it's running. So use them; they're great. But back to this. Here we have a class. Its entire job is fetching strings from the web. It takes a request type. In this case, it only accepts a string that specifies here's what goes in our URL formatter. But all it's supposed to do, give me the minimum amount of information that I need to make a web call, and I will either raise an error or I will give you back what you expect. Plain and simple. And then we have some classes here that extend it. If you just create that, sure, go ahead, run it a couple times and make sure that it works the way it should. But in a test case, let me put that back down. In your testing library, you want to test multiple means of good input. You want to test multiple cases of bad input. Where do you expect it to bring up an exception? Can you use a randomly generated list of things that you know it should error? Can you generate a random list of things that it should not raise an error? And honestly, no matter how good your test suite is, the randomness of the world and everyone that uses it is never going to cover everything. But if you go back in and make a change to an underlying library, or you made a typo, or you inadvertently changed a bit of functionality that you didn't mean to, and you rerun your test library, chances are you've written your tests such that it will be able to catch errors for you. And you'll know about it other than just pushing buggy code and then getting reports from users saying, did you mean to do this? But, okay, so looking at this, you asked before what I like to do personally. Here we're using the unit test standard library, actually, never mind, as a test case. And for this test service class, we can, it takes an initializer, it has its own objects, but when the test suite actually runs, it only cares about methods on it that start with test. You can call them whatever you want, but if you give it no explicit instructions, it will always and only run things that begin with test. So here for our service, this class should test everything specific to this service class. So we have a test init. Personally, I name test underscore name a function that is trying to test. So test the initializer. Let's see, for this particular one, when we initialize something, we should verify. It's just verifying self.assert true. Has adder. Does it have the attributes that we expect it to? When we initialize something, does it assign the variables that we have? This test service one, tested in different methods. We have a bunch of different is none, assert raises, and actually this is a nice one with this assert raises. You can say within this block of code, it should eventually raise this not implemented error exception. It is nice and Pythonic because unit test has been around for a good long time now. We'll get a little more. We can go more in depth when we create one from scratch, but just to give an idea of what one might look like in a production library. Another nice thing with this test or this class-based approach is that you can create a test case for a class-based test case for your based class, and then extend your test class to cover another class that extends whatever you were testing with the other one. And it will run all the same tests unless you overwrite those methods, which is great. It's applying classes to tests. And it's another way where you can reduce the amount of code. If you're you mentioned before, when you're copying and pasting a bunch of code, and things might go wrong, or you can make. I'm just realized how dark it is in here. If people want me to turn on the lights,
It doesn't matter to me.
all right. But test cases, because hey, this test case works on this, and I like this format. Let me just copy the entire thing and move it somewhere else so I can test something that works about the same. We wouldn't do that in normal code, so we can use a better class-like approach, or inheritance, or extending a module even in our test cases. It keeps things nice and compact. And just so that's a very brief kind of overview of that kind of unit test implementation. And just to show you guys what it looks like when you're running it with PyTest, there's a reason why in here all of these asserts we're doing self dot run this thing that is inherited from the test case class, as opposed to instead of, let's see, assert is instance report string. If we were in code, or if you're starting off, you might actually just write, you might use the assert in Python, and then do assert, is instance, in this case, report is type string. But this, the assert statement there doesn't give you the logging that we're about to see here that is surfaced using PyTest. So let me actually run that. Actually, you don't even need to do Python. When you pip install PyTest into whatever environment you want to run this in, it gives you this PyTest command into your environment. You just run it. It automatically looks for all of your tests in there and finds all the files that start with test, go through all of the classes in there, and run all the methods that start with test. And I'm fairly certain that it's failing because all of those are dependent on having the correct network connection. But this is actually pretty cool. We can run back through here. So what PyTest does, being the manager, is it looks for a directory called tests. And then we can give it an init, do whatever it needs to, and then it looks for files to start with test. And then went through those files, looked at all of our classes, or even just standalone functions in those classes. As long as they start with test, they will automatically run. It will run through all of them. You see it uses Celery to speed up the process a little bit. But then it gives a report for each of the tests that it ran. Each one of these dots is a successful test. And every time that it comes up with an F, that test failed for some reason. And then any of the failures it does find, it gives you a detailed report as to why it failed. So if you were trying to find an error, this one actually came up with a key error this should raise an exception, I think. Yeah, it's all the way down here. But if that fails for any reason, it's a fail. If it fails any of your asserts, it's a fail. It gives you a nice printout below. You can go one by one and do all of these. But we also get, we can do PyTest. We can go into tests and specify an individual file. So I want to test the core just by itself. And now it only runs it on that one file. Or we can do, to give you an example, we can specify using K, only run methods that start with test, test cloud in there, and no, test cloud star. It's just like searching for files. I guess I don't have any cloud things in there. I know I have some cloud things in there. Let's try that. Whatever. We can use... this is annoying me now. Alright. Let's just do... Should be test... Let's try test underscore valid. Otherwise, I'll open up the help doc. There it goes. Now I found something. I guess I don't have anything that starts with test cloud or anything that has cloud in it. But you can we're using PyTest we're just using PyTest as the manager for our test suite. We're not using in this case, I'm not using PyTest for actually building out any of the code. And the nice thing is the unit test library, since it is standard library, it comes with every installation of Python. Most testing frameworks and testing libraries support it. So if instead of using PyTest, you want to move it over to, I think Tox Tox doesn't support PyTest, if I recall. Tox, by the way, Tox is it's another testing framework, and you can set it up as a CI on your GitHub. So whenever you push a handful of commits, it will automatically run the test suite on the code and give you a report. It can automatically run the test suite whenever someone makes a pull request, and you get that report in the pull request documentation automatically, which is really cool. But I don't remember what I was about to say. Anyone have any questions so far? Because we just ran through quite a lot already.
When you start development, do you start with those assert lines and then later on you convert them to unit tests? Is that the approach?
So assert is something special in Python. Actually, I think this might be. I'm going to minimize this, open up a new one for just this project. Assert in Python is a keyword. A keyword in the core of Python. All it does is say if this condition does not equal true, raise an assert error, and that's all it does. So actually, without even writing a file, let's just open Python. So I can do assert true, and nothing happens. Asserts never return anything. They should never assign anything. All they are doing is checking does some conditional equal true. And it's the same thing. You can do that, or I just had my JavaScript get in my Python there. Just like anything you would do in an if statement, just replace our if with assert. Same thing. You can have if true and false, just whatever you do that would eventually evaluate to truthiness in Python, you can do in an assert. So for testing values, let's say x equals 1, we can assert that the value of x is equal to 1, and it's true. Or if we expected it to be 2, it would give us an error, and it would exit. It would either exit out of our code if we weren't handling it, because if you're asserting something, if you're asserting something and you leave it in your code base, that is something that should always be true. However, there is a problem by design with assert statements in Python, at least as far as relying on them in production. And that is, let me pull up my help doc here. There is a flag in Python that can be set at the command line or as an environment. Mine is move assert and debug dependent statements. Yeah. So yeah, it's also Python optimize equals true, false, whatever evaluates to truthiness in your environment variables.
Does that
and do those changes and also discard doc strings. I didn't know that one was there. But yeah, all these are tiny things that will make your code a little bit faster.
I was going to ask if that implies that assert and debug. I'm surprised about the debug, that they're heavy operations.
It depends. The thing with assert statements, because it is evaluate whatever I am given to a Boolean and either raise an error or not. I don't think it's any faster or slower than, say, an if statement in Python. However, if let's say you were doing production, or you were in a development environment, you wanted to use asserts to assert that this variable that I'm given exists in a database before running the following code as a development level assert, then that would absolutely be something that you would want to remove before production, because now you're just the things that the assert statement could evaluate to truthiness might take a long time, and I think other things like this, also discarding doc strings. I guess that's supposed to save memory. I would love to actually look that up.
Doesn't really matter
Later.
nowadays.
Yeah, that one might be a holdover from when it was a little more cumbersome, I guess, in terms of memory. Maybe discarding docstring is the kind of optimization you'd want to run if you were then going to, say, move your PYC files to embedded hardware.
Yeah.
That could be something like with embedded with limited RAM or onboard storage of any kind. I'm kind of surprised that one exists, but yes, don't rely on debug in production. Obviously, don't rely on the standard in production. You can use them in your testing library, but those asserts don't give you that nice printout that we saw before. And I'm going to review those at home. That might be bad. But let's say we have a file, and we're just going to create our good old-fashioned. It takes a numerator, which would be an int, and a denominator, which should also be an int, and this can return float. And I'm going to go in here and set this as Python, so I get my nice little bit there. We do our docstring.
How long has return types been in Python? Like being able to specify the return type.
Annotations have.
Oh, that's an annotation.
Yeah, these are annotations. These are function annotations.
Okay.
I think function annotations have been around. No, at least 3.3. I want to say 3.5 is when they really started. When this particular syntax was introduced.
Is that specifying a constraint that will?
Absolutely not.
No.
Yeah, we'll take a look at this in a second.
So that's just like a comment, basically.
Exactly.
Oh.
So I'm gonna let's create this here. All we need to do is when we divide two numbers, we return our numerator divided by denominator. We'll just save this. I'm just gonna do. Well, let's create a new folder here for the time being. All right. Let's get into that new folder, and some people like doing this, even if you don't have anything that runs in the file, just to make sure that everything is proper Python. You can do that. As an aside, if you want to do that, we can do divide 1 and 2. If we run that again, it won't do anything because it is only going to put print statements to the console. And if this was part of a module, you could do if name equals main, run this code. All that's doing is there is a Dunder variable available in every single file that tells you its relative file name, and by relative I mean depending on where it's called from, that it will only ever have Dunder main as that value if it is the file that you have in, that Python is initially calling. And there are some libraries that we've looked at in the past that will replace that syntax with something a little nicer. Personally, I like using the begins library for that. But
I'm sorry, which library?
begins. I'll actually give an example of that because I think I have it in my main Python bit there. So the pip install is begins with an S at the end, but it's import begins, or import begin with no S. And instead of this if name equals main, we can just do, well, let's call it def main. That runs that. And I love just showing this off so we can go into this.
More like other languages.
Yeah. We do begin.start as a decorator. Not familiar. Decorators are a shorthand in Python. It's just a function that takes another function, wraps it in something, and then returns that function. So this begin.start decorator is wrapping our main function for to take care of all that functionality and more that I'll gladly show in a second because I just think it's cool. And if we want, then so we have ops.py, and even though we don't have that if name equals main, because we use that, I can run it, and it still runs. It still runs as our main. And what I think is really cool about it is we can do num. Annotations can also be strings. Again, they are not evaluated in any way, shape, or form in terms of the runtime of your code. So we can really do whatever we want. You can actually set the annotation as a function, and I think the function will run and assign to the annotation whatever the return is. And I've seen some people use that with a localization tool like Babel to create language localized version of their help strings, which is really cool.
Wow.
It's so cool. But I digress. I get easily excited about stuff like that. But let's say we have our variables. We're gonna replace our 1 and 2. Actually, with num and denominator. I don't remember if I spelled that correctly or not. I'm just going to call it dem and be consistent. So then we can replace these with that. And maybe even give it a doc string. So in this case, we say if you were to import ops.py right now, you could import a function called main. You could import a function called divide. So it can be used anywhere. In this case, our main function is just calling divide with a numerator and denominator. But with this little bit of this is bugging me. I don't actually need to do that right now. But yeah, it's we have our main function. It takes two things. We've given it string annotations and a doc string. Save it. We go back here and we type in Python ops.py and then ask for a help string. That's something that begins gives us by using the doc string and the annotations and the names, and it's wonderful and I love it. We can even do things like, hey, if you only give us one thing, let's just say our denominator is 1, and I'll just return the value back to you. If we run this again, you'll see that positional arguments is now just 1, and denominator has moved down into optional arguments because it already has a default value, and the default value is 1. I love it. I make command line tools all the time. This makes my job so that much easier. But just now to show it working, the first, well, actually, let
So
me.
it's kind of like a basic version of, I don't know if you've heard of the click module.
Yeah, I prefer this over click, but yeah, they're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I think begins played better with annotations earlier, so I just kind of clung to that. But let's just go back to this. And let's say 3 divided by 5, type errors. So, to put both of these on the same thing, there's kind of a 2-in-1 here. Number 1, if you're not familiar, command line variables being input to functions are always strings, and you need to do type checking and converting when possible or when needed. So in this really dumbly, let's just assume that we're always going to be the person who's using our command line tool is always going to be nice and only give us ints. But as a number 2, unsupported operand type, that came from this line right here. So even though we specify that this function expects ints for these two, there is no type checking whatsoever. And so it gives us, it tried to divide 2 strings. If we rerun this, we've converted over to ints. It should work just fine. There's 0.6. Hey, Vanessa. Are the lights still good?
Yeah, let's turn the lights on. It's going to work now.
All right. I think the TV should be bright enough. Everyone still good?
Yep.
All right. I love this. We're talking about testing and all that. I'm going down a rabbit hole into things that I just love about Python.
Yep.
Yay, live coding. So yeah, this is something very basic. But if let's say we don't have this in here, let's say we were building this out, and we don't know what is. Let's say it's a larger program. We just have hundreds, thousands of functions all over the place, and we don't know why something is failing. We might, this might be a good case for, well, let's open a folder. It's a good case for opening a folder. Creating a test suite. So for here, create a folder called tests. It's a nice way of saying, hey, this is in my high level directory, or in whatever highest level directory you want to go, depending on the code that you want to test. Create a new test thing, and we're going to do test ops.py, and open this up side by side. Ops, there we go. So, first thing we can do, as I said before, you can use the unit test from standard library to manage the tests in the file. You get all of those self.assert true, assert none methods that you get from the test case class, and we can use PyTest as the manager outside. Although, just to show that you can import PyTest and any kind of extensions from. And actually, let's just open up this guy here, import PyTest, and run a dir on that. So, everyone see that? If you're not familiar with dir, it just tells you all of the everything that is attached to what you give it. If you give it a class, it gives you all of the the class variables and class methods. If you give it a module, like a file or a library, it tells you everything that you could import from that library, all of your globals, functions, all of that. Anything that you can call, because in Python, everything is an object. We can even call dir on none. That's everything that none has. It's insane. And most of that is just because most things in Python inherit from the base Python object, and all that comes from that. But just to go back up here, if you want to use specific attributes of the testing library that you're using to manage your tests, they offer plenty of things. Warnings. Let's see. Raises, like that self.assert raises name of exception. You have your set trace. I'm just kind of pointing at things that I've personally used before, and I'm not sure which ones they actually the people want you to use or not. But let's see, class, files, generators, all sorts of different things. But if we do dir, well, let me import unit test and do the same thing on that. So here's what we get for unit test. And this is what we saw before, our unit test.test case for creating that the test case classes. You can test your entire program. You have an entire test suite management and a bunch of other helper functions that you get from this module. But just kind of sticking with what we saw before, let's go ahead and import unit test. And actually, I'm going to do a from in this case. From unit test import test case. There we go. And we're going to create test ops that inherits from test case. And I like I always love my doc strings, even if this isn't going to last too long. But we want to create a function that tests our divide. Always must refer to self in classes, and these don't return anything. Can always go back and be a little more detailed on those. But at the very least, we just to show this off, we can do self.assert and look at all of these things that we can assert. I remember looking up what almost equal actually means, and I don't remember. My intuition tells me it's something like float. Because floating point arithmetic can be a little squirrely. We can look that up if you guys want. Counts, does it have the same number of items in two different lists or collections more generically? Things specifically predicts. Assert equal, you'll use a ton because that's our equal sign operator equivalence. Is it false? Is it greater than? Equal is something, is an item in a list. Is it the same object in memory? Is it the same, is instance, meaning is it the same class or does it inherit from the same base class? And I think there also is assert, no, it's just is instance. I was thinking like, is it is type? Is it none? Not none. Less or equal. Do the lists equal in terms of like do all the elements equal each other in here? Not equal, not in, not. You could do regex. Raises the exception. There's so many things that you could do in a assert and then have some boilerplate around like list, or what was it, assert count equal. If you wanted to do that, it'd be assert len of some list equals len of some other list. A little shorthand code, and you get that full report from when we run it with PyTest. It's really nice. But just to show this off running, let's just do assert equal, and we want the output of, well, let's go ahead and do import ops, so we get the actual things we want to test in here. Ops.divide. We expect that 1 divided by 2 should equal 0.5. And we'll just leave it at that. So, if we look back in our tree structure over here, let's just say that this was the top level of project that we were working on. We have our test directory, and we have this ops thing here. Let's exit out of this. PyTest is just a pip install, so you can do pip install PyTest. We're connected to the internet right now. I'm just going, oops, let me put that where it really should be. Just make sure it's up to date. Something wasn't up to date. Oh, that's right. I need to be sudo to do this. Not going to deal with it now. I don't want to mess anything up. So anyway, we can just run PyTest. There we go. So what happened here is it tried. Well, this was an import error, but even with the import error looking for ops, we get this lovely little hint. We still get our error. It started populating things, ran into the one file, ran into an error, gave us that error, no module named ops. And what's going on there is because PyTest actually goes into the test library. If you were testing a module that if you want to locally install an actual library that has a setup.py file in there, you can do this and it installs it in place, and now it's available to be imported anywhere. But if I go back here, because I had to do this before, this is some boilerplate code, more or less, that we can put in here, and to just kind of show what's going on with this a little bit. All that we're doing here is we are looking for the absolute path of our test directory, going up one level and adding it to our system path so that PyTest, all of our test files, can find code that is here or in subfolders or whatever, so you don't actually have to install it. I'm a little embarrassed at how long it took me to actually figure that out the first time that I tried doing it, because I was doing this on a module that, I did that pip install period, and then every single time I wanted to see if my things worked, I would have to do pip install period, make sure it was still up to date, and then it would pull down the code that I had changed. But this just says, is this completely foreign to anyone, the idea of a path on your system? Okay. I need to catch myself before I start talking about lower system level things. So, all right. Every operating system has an environment variable called a path. When you go to run something in Python or any other language, whatever that initial thing is looking for, even when you open up a terminal and you open bash, when I type Python, it doesn't know what Python is. It uses the path variable in the path variable is a long string that has multiple folder locations that it says, I'm going to go in this order, and I am going to look for an executable with this given name, in this case Python, and the first time that I come up, that I find a file in any one of these directories that has that name, Python, I'm going to run that. So you can get around that by starting at the root in POSIX environments, Linux, Mac, or POSIX Unix environments. It starts with a backslash. Every single file and executable in your system, its absolute location starts with a backslash. If you are on a Windows-based machine, it starts with the drive letter and colon, and then you start doing that and going down the file tree. So what this bit of code is doing is we are saying that for the duration that this program is running, I want you to insert this directory location into the path so that the next time that you have to go look for something to import a file or to look up a file by a non-root level path, also look for this one.
Now, is the path or Python path you modify?
So in this case, it's just path. I think sys.path is just path.
It is.
Python path is a little more specific because we could, in this case, we absolutely could change instead of doing path, do Python path, and it would work because we're only looking for Python imports or for the Python executable itself. But if you do sys.path.insert, now you can also do JSON files or any other kind of data file.
I got you.
Yeah. And as a more concrete example, I can echo my path. This is the string with all of the locations on my machine that it will look for that executable file. Only once it has exhausted all of these locations and unable to find Python lol will it give you the command not found error. So kind of a shallow dive into how your operating system looks up executables and things to find.
Now is the program is Python gonna remove whatever the string from the path variable?
Yes. So what's going on there? This because I just did echo. Let me see if it's any bigger. Yeah, that's all it is. So this is just the path as it exists in the OS. I don't remember how sticky it is, but once you get into sys and OS, without specific keywords, none of the changes that you make to environ, os.environ for the environment variables, or sys.path are permanent. Once when Python first loads up and you import path, you import sys, before it gets imported into your file, and I'm sure some core developer might complain at how I'm going to explain this, it reads the path variable from the environment, converts it into whatever, probably a list of strings as Python types, and now we can treat it like any other list, but it doesn't save out either by default or at all. Same kind of thing with os actually os isn't imported, path is imported, but environ for the environment. Environ is actually a read-only dictionary of your environment variables. So I think you could also do envar. Let's look at this interactively. Actually, this is wonderful. I never actually have a reason to go into these kind of things.
It's been 15 years. I think there actually is a way to write back to the environment variables, although I might have been shelling down. It's been too long to remember.
Let's see.
I had the frustration of having to move a ton of crap from one laptop to another, and resetting all my environment variables. So I wrote a little script to go into environment, pull them all out, print them out in a way that it's coming back to printing them out. So they are a bash script. So then I can run the script to load.
Have an interactive prompt, and a lot of compiled languages don't really have that. The closest nice thing that I have seen from a compiled language is Swift Playgrounds, but it's still, every time you make a change, it needs to compile that entire file and then gives you the output. Whereas Python, you can just go line by line and just explore and have fun. You can also do that with Node. JavaScript via Node also has an interpreter.
Go has an interpreter too.
Go ahead.
I think so. Wait, maybe not.
I will need to ask my coworker about that.
I guess not. Never mind.
My assumption is that you can't have this level of an interactive prompt in compiled languages, but I'm sure someone did it for probably for C.
I think I was thinking of something else.
but these are built in, which is great. But just to kind of show by not by printing, but just calling it, because we're in our interactive prompt, it gives us the value of os.environ, which is a managed dictionary of all of our environment variables. And then I asked, what type is it? It is actually it's a private class, os._environ. So it is. If you did is instance, I'm not. Let's just see. Is instance os.environ and dict. Oh, it needs a close. Okay, nope. It is a fully managed dictionary, and my guess is that they have some special getter and setter functions on there. So we could do os.environ. Let's pull up that path so we can treat it like a dictionary. There are so many cool things I could just go into about how you can actually implement dictionary and indexing and whatever on your custom classes, because that's what they're doing here. Or environment, I think that's what they're doing here. So you can do that, or you can also do the other thing that dictionaries allow you to do, which is use get. Same thing, although with get, if you didn't know, you can also give it a default argument. So if it doesn't find this key, return that value. Kind of a nice space saver. Now what I'm thinking is that environ.set is either going to be ephemeral or it's going to give an error. So sets, let's just say we're going to set test. Yeah. So the environment is read-only. The path you can write to, but again, it doesn't write out to system path. And all of these are done when you whenever something imports at first startup, it parses out the path. It parses out the environment, and now it's either read-only or will be any changes will be deleted on the program exit. So it is completely non-destructive. It's not going to interrupt your other programs. There might be a way to set environment variables in the actual environment from Python, but you're not going to be able to do it like that. So, any questions before we go on? I also am looking at this and realize just how much I need to clean up my path. I have Pebble stuff in here. I will deal with that later. So, without leaving anyone in the dust, we now know what's going on here. Okay, so we save that. I can get rid of this. We save this, and now that we've put this init, Dunder init file in this directory, tests is now a Python module. There's no such thing as the standard library tests folder, but now that we have it in here, we're in the same root directory right now for this, and with that init there, I can actually import tests, and it just treats it like a module. I can run dir on tests, and while we don't actually have anything in there, you can see that we do have this parent dir that we pulled out and then inserted into the path. I can run test dot parent dir, and this is now where it is telling our PyTest to look for this file here. And something else you can do, even though it's not listed in dir, we can actually go test.testops because Python. And it test ops is not a package. Maybe not. It sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't. It might have changed that in a more recent release. Anyway, what that now should allow us to do is go back to our PyTest, and it should be able to find our ops file, which it did. It ran our test, and we get if there's nothing to report, it just says it ran okay. There's nothing that you need to act on. But yeah, so that is our. Let's go back to our test ops here. We have a single use case in here where, yeah, we gave it 1 and 2. It returned 0.5 as it should. Let's just do another assert equal ops dot divide. Again, it says, we accept an int, but things can be messy. I wonder what it will give us there. And just kind of as a placeholder, we can say none. It should error, but it will say, hey, these two things don't equal each other. So 5.0 does not equal none. And because I'm lazy, I'm just going to do this and replace it with none. Well, I can also get rid of that. So just kind of further backing up, as long type annotations, do not do any type checking. And as long as your tests run, it's not going to tell you that. So if we run this again, we get a 0. By the way, what we're doing here is this would be a unit test, hence the library. There are a handful of different names for tests. The most common one is test an individual function, or test a program from, say, a command line. They call it an end-to-end test. Like, just given the information at the beginning of a normal use case and going all the way to the end, is everything running end-to-end, run all my tests, and is everything working the way it should? Another thing that we're doing right now, this is called test-driven development. If you haven't heard that phrase before, it is instead of going back and retrofitting existing code or writing a ton of code and then writing some tests for it, is, hey, I created this new function. Before I do anything more with actually creating and working on my code base, I'm going to run over to my test suite and immediately write some test cases for it, so that before your mind even leaves the environment of just this one function that you're working on, you already have some tests for it that you can just set and forget later. So this works, but it's kind of clumsy. We're saying that we can accept all ints, or honestly any number, as input for this divide. Maybe we do. Let's just do for n in range, let's say just -1,000 to +1,000. For d in, same thing. So let's say that's not at all what I want. Results equals ops dot divide numerator and denominator. Let's do assert is instance is, I'm trying to remember, I think float should work. Yeah, float should work there. And self dot assert is it equal or equals? I'm not remembering. Oh, deprecated function. That's what. Just assert equal. Results, and just doing it here, n divided by d. So, in theory, those should always be right. It should always return at the very least a float. I think float would also work for int for is instance. If that's not the case, we'll deal with it in a second. And the result should equal. It should always equal this exact thing. It makes sense for all these ranges. However, we'll see in a second, we've not taken care of something. Our famous, our dreaded division by zero error, because we went from negative to positive. That denominator is going to pass through zero at some point. So there are two ways that we can deal with that. We can either go into our test case here, and we can exclude zero in some way. Well, we can either exclude zero and then explicitly do, say, with self dot assert. Oh, oops. With self dot assert raises zero division. That's what it is. A zero division error within this block of code. It should raise a zero division error. So ops divide 1 divided by 0. And just to show that this is going to work, I'm going to comment that out. If we run this again, it should run nice and clean because it did in fact raise it. If you're not familiar with Python's with keyword, this is a little bit of advanced, say 201 usage with Python. It is a nice shorthand for, hey, this thing that we're doing here is either going to do something when we enter this block of code or is going to do something when we exit this block of code. And you can also do temporary operations inside of it. So as the classic with example in Python is with open, my file.txt as fin, file in. It's just a print fin.read lines. And what's going on there is when we call open, it's going to assign it to a variable called fin. It's going to actually open the file contents. It's going to run whatever code is inside of that block, inside that block underneath the with. And then when it exits that block, it's going to automatically call fin.close for you, so you close your file. That's automatically built into open. You, like with all other magic Python stuff, you can, it's handled via Dunder methods. And Dunder just means that, it's, let's actually go into here. Dunder just means double underscore. It's shorthand for double underscore. And if I do dir of, say, string, all of these things that start and end with double underscores, that is the Dunder contains, the Dunder deer, Dunder doc, all of those things. For the open, I think, let's take a look at this. Open is a keyword. No, I'm not seeing it here. I think open returns a file. I think file is also reserved. No. Anyway, if you were implementing this in a custom class, you would have a Dunder enter and a Dunder exit. And Dunder enter takes nothing, I think. It just it initialize my object and run whatever code goes into enter, and then when it exits, it runs Dunder exit, and it is given variables that include any kind of error messages. So what's actually going on here under the hood for our self.assert raises, whatever they're doing under the hood, when it exits, is that exit call is being given. This block of code raised an exception. Here's the exception, and then inside of it, it's saying, is that exception a zero by division error? Well, that's what I was expecting. Just ignore it. If it's not a zero by division error, or if it got nothing, hey, something went wrong. Raise a PyTest error or a unit test error. So that's what's going on under there. Any questions? Because I love going on tangents like that, but I go through them very quickly. Let's go.
Go ahead.
For exit, does it have a default value? Can you just use that with and assume that it's going to work properly, or will it throw an error?
Here's another fun thing you can do in Python. Let's just say we have a class op. Honestly, you can just do that. It has an init, it has whatever. We want to create an enter, and it takes self. And typically, what enter expects is that it actually returns an instance of itself. So that is the minimum boilerplate code for having an enter with a Python statement. It just returns itself. And then when you come down to exit, whenever it exits out of that with block, it takes two inputs. I think one might be one is an error that was raised, and I'm not maybe a context for the other one. I don't quite remember.
My notes here have self, type, value, and traceback.
So type, value, and traceback. If you need to use them, you can. If you always want to ignore them, you can use another bit of Python. This will always exit and just do nothing. What's going on here is, number one, in Python, when you use the star, you are doing grouping or expanding operations. So you might be familiar with, back down in here, let's say we can do X and Y for our terrible variable naming. But you can do that. You can do multiple assignment on a single line, and it works just fine. X, Y. What's going on under the hood there is it's actually saying the compiler is saying, hey, there is a tuple here of variable names called X and Y that is being assigned to a tuple with 1 and 2 in it, and then it expands everything out. Now so that's what's going on under the hood there. Where's it going with that? And another way that you can interpret that is up here. We can use it's using or you can also think of it as using a star, meaning unpack this tuple, unpack this list, unpack this collection of any type. So if we have a list, let's just say, they made range an object in here, so there actually are range objects as of Python 3, I think, or maybe 3 point something. Don't quite remember at this point. I think if you do, let's say L equals range of 5, I think if you unpack a range, meaning using our unpack on L, no, can't use it there. Let me give you. Let's actually look at a practical example of that.
Would that be the same star when you're like from something import star?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's different use case, but it is kind of similar. So what he's talking about there, like you might have seen from OS import star, and if we do that, it's just saying import absolutely everything from this module. And if we run that, now we can just use environ like that.
One question for you. On the import statement, what's the difference between from OS import everything or just import OS?
Okay, so as another example here, we can do from OS import environ. All that's doing is the from there is rather than importing OS and now I can do os.environ. If all I want is environ, I can do from OS import environ, and the only thing that is getting imported is just environ, and now I can just call it by environ as opposed to os.environ.
Whereas if you import OS, you have to call
os.environ. It's the from is doing selective imports. Personally, I don't like doing star imports because now you're just importing way more than you actually need. Sometimes you actually do need to do that, and there are some use cases, but that's just a personal preference thing.
The other downside to doing the star import is suddenly you've got a variable name. You don't know if you created it in your code or if it was from the star import, and you can spend a lot of time finding it.
Yeah. I'm too much of a clean code freak to not know where what variables are in the namespace of my file.
Yeah.
So personally, I don't like it, but I know a lot of people do use it. It makes things really easy for teachers when they want to teach a thing and just having, we're just going to import everything from this one, say a test file that I created for you guys to use, things like that. But trying to think, range probably was too just weird. I'm wondering.
Isn't it like a generator now?
Yeah, it's a generator. It's a generator, but it's also a range object, which acts as a generator. I'm wondering if it will let me do that now. No, I just can't do it like that then. Let's say
Star args in a function.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of doing. So let's say we have a function called sum, and maybe it takes a list, and it will take a list of floats or numbers of any kind that it wants to sum together, and then you can call sum on it. But let's say that we have a use case where instead of providing a list, we just want to add up all of the arguments that are given to our function. In that case, you might have seen star args before. And all that's saying is this function accepts an arbitrary number of arguments, and they are all going to be put into a list called args. So in that case, let's just do print args just for demo's sake. So when we call sum, and oh, by the way, by defining sum, I think I have overwritten native Python function. Because I think it's just sum. It's not math.sum. So oops, we can just exit out and get that back. Anyway, if I give it 1, hey, it's actually a tuple because args are supposed to be non-changeable, or yeah, whatever. But I can do sum of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and they're all there. You might have also seen this args double star quargs, and just to show what that's doing is we go to print args, print quargs, and the reason why it's called quargs is it accepts things by keyword arguments as a dictionary. Typically, you'll see, sometimes you'll need that, but typically people only ever use the args and especially quargs when you are overriding a function and you want to pass all of the existing arguments and keyword arguments to the function that you are overriding and then adding functionality onto. You see it a lot in documentation for any kind of library that makes web operations because they have a base class and then they just all extend it. So whenever, like the request library, when you go to request.get and look at the function, even the docs for it, it just takes args, quargs, and just passes everything off to whatever lower level function is calling.
Yeah, I think it's URL lib, I think, right?
Yeah, it's a wrapper around URL lib, which is part of the standard library. Trying to make sure what time I got.
Sorry, I got a fly swatter.
All right. Thank you for last month, by the way.
Yeah, a couple people asked me to upload my slides and my.
I can add you to the Code for Orlando GitHub.
Yeah,
Or, not Code for Orlando.
The
Orlando Python GitHub, and you'll be able to put it up there.
If you can do it, then I'll just put it there. But I was gonna come here tonight and troubleshoot that. But then I was running late. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
That is okay. Thanks for coming out.
Next time.
Okay. I like to end at 9 because it's 2 hours, but that's still 25 minutes. 25 minutes. Why?
Have you ever had to make a custom assert? And what does that, like some other condition that didn't fit the default ones there?
I've never had to, but I know that you can.
Would you inherit the base assert class and then make your own?
I think so. You want to take a look at that? It's kind of I know we were talking about other kind of tangential Python-y things. Like, oh, by the way, unless you're using the localization library, I think it's like L8N, or in Python it's the Babel library, and people who do web development use it religiously, and it works like other languages where you give it. Let me get rid of this for a second. All you do is import this underscore, and then you give it the hello, and then it goes looking in a giant list of text that says if when I get this string hello and the locale is Spanish, it should say hola, sort of thing. But if you're not using that library, the Pythonic way of saying ignore a variable is using an underscore. And so by doing this dot, and instead of doing .args, .underscore, we are deliberately telling people who look at our code, and also, by the way, when I say people who look at your code, I also mean you in 6 months when you don't remember your code. Saying I explicitly am ignoring anything that gets put into this underscore. Another kind of cool thing, at least as of Python 3.6, I think.
So that means any arguments you're passing.
Yeah.
Like all of them.
That goes right back to what you asked initially. It's like when I exit, I want to ignore everything. That is exactly how you would do it.
Sorry, it was more when you create this op class. If we were to delete the last 2 lines there, would that still run if you were to throw it into a web statement?
Well, there's a pretty darn easy way to know. We can run dir on the object. I don't see exit in there, so I don't think so. I think these Dunder methods explicitly tell Python this object can or cannot be used in a with statement. It's like if I tried to do with, let's say 1 and it's a string, it's looking for enter and doesn't find it. So this code right here is the bare minimum to get something that you can at least use in an enter clause. And typically you'll find most libraries that do that, or the most common type of library that you'll find that does something like that, is any file that any class that handles I/O. There's the file object, that example from earlier, that with open as fin, that. Socket libraries, anything dealing with internet communications that doesn't give you something clean like the request library, use that. A past example is that we had looked at a couple months ago is IIO HTTP. If you're not familiar with it, this is the async and await equivalent of the request library. It is the brain dead way of doing asynchronous web calls in Python currently. There we go. So they're actually using the async with. So it has a slightly different syntax. I think it's like is async enter or is async def dunder enter. I personally have not toyed around with that myself. But here they have their client session. So there's going to be an asynchronous call in here, but async with session.get URL as response. So when it goes into that, it's calling that enter, returning itself, assigning to a variable called response, and then we await we await and return the response.text, and when we get out of that, it calls close to close the socket connection, because especially with that, especially with client session as session, you can make multiple calls from that same session object, and the remote server will view that as coming from the same user. Like if you within a session, you could log into Facebook and then go around your Facebook feed. But once you exit the session, it closes that socket connection. When you open up a new one, you'll need to re-log in again.
You could do that with requests too.
Yeah.
Request on session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you'll typically find that with anything that does I/O, but you can do that with any library that just needs to tidy up after itself. It's great for that. I implemented one at some point where upon initializing, it would open up a new web browser window, and then upon exiting the block of code, the test code, it would close the browser window. Very simple. And it looks Pythonic as hell with that with. Anyway, I can go down rabbit holes all day or all night. But I guess kind of going all the way back here, I can just keep that code in there. It's not going to do anything. If we want to go back and check this, we can do if not. This is actually another kind of. I could use some computer science every once in a while when coding. We can do if not is instance of num int. Let's just assume we're only going to get ints in here, and or not is instance then int. We can just return, and by the way, in Python, if you don't return anything, it's just none. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. So if we come back up here, self dot insert equal, let's just give it a string and none just to be thorough. Oh, I didn't even call divide. Ha ha ha. Ops dot divide. Let's go back to my test.
Well, you need another argument.
Oh, yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I started typing in the wrong spot there. So it doesn't actually need another one. I just need to know where it's closed off. Let's just say, let's just do one. It's gonna fail. None does not equal 1, so it returned. So with the little bit of computer science bit that I mentioned is if you've ever dealt with Boolean logic, we can actually, you can treat it like a double negative because we're doing if not this thing or not this thing. We can actually simplify this in terms of logic and even line length by putting these in here and flipping the or to and. So if this is an int and this is an int, then normally we do something, but because we want to catch the not, we're going to go in here. That is probably 50% of what I use my computer science minor for during my job these days, is just Boolean logic gates to do minor. I'm saving an infinitesimal amount of time by doing so, but it makes me happy. So that's one check that we can do. And if we go back, if we went back to our original example and we put floats in there, it's not going to do that. But we are now saying, you better give me an int or I'm going to give you nothing back, quite literally at this point. We can also do if then equals 0. We can just also return nothing. So this is actually going to give us an error now because we're no longer getting a zero division error. So in PyTest, we're going to get a PyTest error. Oh, well, I also left that back in there. So this actually is just returning none now. So we can just leave that as it is. But we're no longer raising a division by 0 error. It caught that in there. We've now fixed it. Or if you wanted it to raise a division by 0 error, that's when you would leave this in. But if you didn't want to, and you just wanted to return none, well, we've now fixed it. I wonder if it has not raises. I forget if that was in the list. No. There might be something in there like does not raise. But anyway, we can just get rid of that. And if we go into, well, if we change that to self dot insert equal else dot divide 1 and 0 again, we should get none this time. And it's true. For the sake of time, and well, let's just do this. Wondering about this because just doing that on a 0, we're going to get a division by 0 error as well. So I'm wondering. Oh, actually, let's do it this way. So let's say we remove this bit of code. So if we are given a 0, like we're now doing type checking. That's cool, but we're still going to raise a division by 0 error. In our test case here, we can do if d equals 0 with self dot. I want to look in here to see if there was anything raises or not. No, I think I remember seeing at some point that someone had to come up with some kind of custom code to handle does not raise. But anyway, we can say assert raises 0 division error, and we'll just put that code in there. I wonder if does, yeah, then we can do else that, and then we can test our return values and just see if that runs. Going through all of those numbers. I think most of the time that's going through there right now is PyTest, but yeah, everything worked. So just kind of, again, looking at the logic here, going through a ton of numbers, and in theory, if you had infinite time, you could just increase these numbers to infinity. So if the denominator is 0, handle that the special case raises a division by 0 error. Otherwise, check to see that it is a float or an int, because is instance does checks inheritance. And check that the result is exactly what we expected. And then once you're done with all that, check that it returns none if we give it a non-integer value. And we could do the same thing here, like for item in list, give it this thing, and everything in that list is not an int, or is not an int. So this one example of going through a fairly simple function, just divide things, handle some cases, come up with not an exhaustive list, but a more programmatic test. Use test case from unit test, run it through PyTest, and then you could take this code as is and integrate it with Tox or any other kind of CI continuous integration environment to automatically run your tests whenever you push changes out into the world. So I love live coding.
Yeah.
This was fun. This is so much better than coming in with, hey, look at all of this code that I wrote. It's 1 million lines long, but don't worry about it. It all works. You don't learn as much as when we're going to type this out line by line. We're going to debug everything together. So we kind of did some debugging, even though whatever. These are my favorite kind of meetings. That is all I have. Are there any more questions as to the content? Anything as to Python? I mentioned potentially doing every other month, going out to a bar and just talking as opposed to having a specific talk. So any ideas, any feedback? Otherwise, I'll just...
question. So it's not about testing, but I have a CLI app. It's kind of popular, but like it's targeted at non-technical users, and so I made a little config file and everything, but they always get stumped on how to install it and how to run it, even though I have simple documentation. Just like, what is the easiest what's the easiest, most foolproof way of distributing a CLI app?
Does it run on Python?
Yes.
So the dead simplest way that I know of for distributing a Python-based CLI is, since it's Python-based, they need Python on their computer already. And if you're going to install something, you might as well install a library, like a Python module, and you can use pip and PyPI as your delivery tool, like what we did with pip install and then get PyTest.
Yeah, they don't. They forget to tick the box in the Python installer and add pip to your path. And that trips them up. So is there a way?
If as long as Python is on there, pip is just another installed module. It gets installed automatically, but when you do Python, when you type Python, it launches an interpreter, does anything like that. There's this -m library, which says, I want you to run a module. And pip is just another module. So take all of pip, just add Python -m, and now you can do all the same things you were doing before.
That'll probably help a lot.
A good thing, as an advantage of doing this Python -m pip instead of normal pip, is you can explicitly say, hey, this Python that I'm running right now, maybe a question that I hear often is when I type Python, it's running version 2.7, but I am running Python 3, and I want to pip install libraries into Python 3. But when I just do pip, it installs into Python 2.7. How can I do Python 3 without changing any, without irreversibly changing anything from like a path point of view? So what you can do is, for that person that uses Python 3, like using Python 3 or Python 3.6 or whatever you have it to access a non-default version, you can just tell them, hey, type Python 3.6 -m pip, and now you're going to pip install into that executable versions or environment of Python. So as long as they have Python in there, you can do pip install the name. I can do PyTest.
I've been doing some of that, but only on Windows systems with idiots. Rephrase it. Non-computer professionals. And
I started Python on Windows.
long
ago.
Yeah, I started on Linux. Windows is kind of new for me. But I used, I think it was PY installer, which builds an exe. And if you give it the right options, it'll pull in the Python binaries and everything. And as long as you set up your command line stuff to tell them, the right stuff to put in and the right help file. Well, you showed me some new tricks here, but I've been using argparse before. But that'll build an exe. Works beautifully as long as you can pass in enough arguments to offset them not doing what you expected. What did I run into? The database server is way off somewhere else, and wasn't what I was told. So I was just passing in a username, password, and database. They couldn't find it. So now I pass in the entire connection string on the command line. So hey, my code works. If you don't know it, man, talk to your sysadmin, because I'm dealing through 4 intermediate companies with a non-computer professional, and so you can't talk to them. You can't use a GoToMeeting because the VPN blocks. It's just one nightmare after another.
Distribution of Python apps has long been a source of hair pulling, especially for more traditional-minded people. With, just give me an exe and I will run it. And also, not too long ago, a 100 megabyte file running on your computer, and you can go even further back. Like 4 megabytes was very large for a file, very large for a program. You download games nowadays. Some games are pushing 20 gigabytes just to run. Just play the game.
GTA 5 is like 60.
There Yeah, it gets they're ridiculously large. There are projects out there that just say, here's my little bit of program code that I have written. I'm just going to include an entire copy of Python in your executable for you, and the exe size is only going to be 100, 120 megabytes.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's nothing. That's less than a quarter the
Yeah.
size of Chrome sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
that's
good
what
idea.
I've been doing. No pushback at all.
Yeah.
Whereas install Python, oh my God.
Yeah. I think the Briefcase was the last or one of the earliest that I knew of that did a thing like that. There's PyInstaller, especially for Windows machines, is great.
That's what my
Yeah, but if they already have
family
Python on there,
much uses, yeah.
Yeah.
I came across this library that Facebook developed. It's like executable archives. I forget what it's called, but it bundles it all into an archive, and then you can execute the archive. I don't know. Yeah, I forget what it's called. I gotta find
Like-
it.
Creates your executable.
Yeah.
that sounds both very useful and very terrifying. Like, I'm gonna run some arbitrary code in a zip file that isn't expanded and easily looked at by
Oh, it's
either
called
like
Czar.
security.
Facebook incubator / Czar.
Is it Czar?
Yeah.
XR files.
Yeah. XAR.
I know I've used them before, and I don't think I had actually read into what they do, and it sounds terrifying
Yeah.
now.
I'm a little old for that, so if the sentence starts with Facebook, I stop.
Facebook, they use a lot of Python in Facebook. They use a lot of other languages too. Instagram is a Django application. Django 2 now, actually, as of a year ago at least. And one of the guys who works at Facebook I don't know if he's the creator or at least he's the maintainer of the Black library, which is another one of these linter programs, so yeah, auto formatters. You can run arbitrary code through Black, and with a bunch of rules, it will spit out pre-formatted, nicely looking code. And it's, when you get into a large organization like the size of Facebook, having a program that you can run files through and then have a common format to everything. Like, we don't care what you use, but you run it through Black, it will replace all of your tabs with 4 spaces. It will put doc strings that you should go back and fill in, all that kind of stuff. Other libraries, people have probably heard of Flake 8 or PyLint. I think also, in addition to giving you linting options in interfaces like this, it can also run files through it. I think the same guy is also one of the core devs. He's actually, I don't know if he's in charge or how much. I think he's just written a lot of code for actually supporting annotations in Python. So I'm so glad that I go to PyCon every year, because they'll have this company is like, I don't trust what they do, and there's just normal developers trying to do some pretty cool things in there, regardless of what all of the managers above them end up doing. You'll find that at
Where's
just about every
PyCon
company. US PyCon is every late spring, early summer. It was mid-May this year in Cleveland. It's going to be in Cleveland again, May next year. It changes location every other year. So this year it was in Cleveland. It's going to be in Cleveland again. I don't know where it's going. Before it was in Cleveland, it was in Portland. And if you get the opportunity, go. If you can only go to a regional one, go. They're very fun. You just get to talk to a bunch of people. They put all the talks online, by the way. Just search PyCon, PyCanada, EuroPyCon. We had Orlando Python that I and Vanessa and a handful of other people helped organize last year. All of our videos are also on YouTube too. But you go to there, you can talk to everyone. Hallway track is always popular, where you just talk to people. I cannot stress how much fun and useful going to language conferences are. no matter what language you're doing. To come all the way back to your question, which was, hey, as long as they have Python on their computer, they can do pip. And using this -m, you can have them explicitly specify what version of Python they want to pip install into, even if their pip is not in path or is messed up. And the way that you do that is in your setup.py or whatever other library. Like I think flit is another one. It's like a managed setup.py file for setup tools. Let's just look at this guy's setup.py. Like this is a name in the Python community. He has setup.py on his whole thing. Never mind. I'm just gonna get out of here. Let's do. I think I remember seeing this one. This one was good. Let's make this bigger. Nope, that's not. I think I'm doing. If you're not familiar with a setup.py file, when you create a library that you want to release out to the world, or you just want to use on your own, setup.py is where you put things like the name of the library, any version information, packages like this is the name that people can import my file from when it's installed, license and other things like that. Maybe further down, no, somewhere else. Introduction to packaging. I'm wondering where it's going to list a lot of things, but no. Maybe just introduction.
Yeah, I was messing around. I was just looking at example setup.pys from like popular libraries like requests, and then I figured it out from that.
Let's actually look at PyTest.
Yeah.
Let's Python PyTest GitHub, probably on GitHub. There's PyTest. And
all the popular libraries have ones.
So here's the setup.py. And the reason why I'm looking at PyTest is because PyTest has a command line utility.
Oh, yep.
So that is something that you specify inside of setup.py. As long as your whatever package you build can be importable as though it were a library.
Yeah.
You can
make your own command.
Right? Here we go. Entry points. Console scripts. PyTest equals PyTest : main. So whenever on install, it will add PyTest to the thing, the many list of things that it will look up in that path string to be able to find. So when a user types PyTest, it goes. This is essentially saying run my PyTest.main function, and then you can have all of your help string and your docs and all of that.
Awesome.
So that's what's going on there. I'm actually also wanting this py.test. So is that even
That's
a thing?
Older.
Yeah. So py.test-h. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that is the older one. Thank you. But yeah, if you can package up your command line utility as a package, as though you pip install it, you can provide an entry point. People can then import it into their own Python projects and run it. Instead of doing os.run or run this string through the bash console, they can just run your main function directly.
Yeah, trying to make my application more modular.
The library.
Yeah.
Yep. Any more questions? As I realize I haven't actually taken a sip out of this the whole time.
Has anybody worked with Raspberry Pi?
I have. It's been a while. There's a Raspberry Pi user group that meets up in Longwood once a month, towards the end of the month. So they typically on a Saturday, so there might be one coming up.
I've been approaching some of the local schools to offer a Python course at like the junior high level,
Mm-hmm.
and Raspberry Pi it's shiny, it's dangly. You know, it's a way to get the interest.
Mm-hmm.
As I've taught a lot of college level courses, and they're so friggin' boring because it's all about this kind of stuff, which you have to know to work at our level. But if you're trying to teach somebody coming into the industry, you know, you need turtle graphics.
Yeah. Also, there's a great iOS app if you have an iPad or iPhone, Pythonista, and it lets you basically use a full Python sandbox in a sandboxed environment on your iOS device and run scripts. And you can even interact with iOS SDK.
So
I installed it, I just didn't do much with it at the time I was actually working for a living.
So the Python, or no, not the Python, the Raspberry Pi Foundation has PyCademy. It's just a whole section devoted to people who want to use the Raspberry Pi to teach people, especially children, how to code. And they have an amazing community. They have amazing support. They do training sessions every so often. I would look at PyCademy North America, and you can become a Raspberry Pi certified educator and have that cert going into schools saying, "Hey, I can offer this, and I am certified. Hey, look, you can put this on the wall." And they'll get. I think the Raspberry Pi Foundation will give you. They'll give you some support in terms of hardware. And either like a discount code for the school that you want to offer it to, or like they'll send you some number of devices as an initial setup for free, especially once you're certified for sure.
Yeah, I certainly, for a small startup class, I've got my own consulting business, so I can write off the cost of picking them up. As long as I'm not giving them the high end with the touch screen and all, it gets a little much to.
Yeah.
The goodness of my heart. But certainly I can pick up one high-end one.
They have a PyTop. I think I'm pulling all sorts of random tidbits that I have floating around in my brain. I think this is one of the things that they potentially include. You might have heard of Seed before, but this is something that they might actually give you maybe one of or a discount on, but just going to pull this up on Adafruit here. This is one of the most, this type of device is one of the most supported in terms of teaching kids, giving kids something that they can use and are familiar enough with, while still being able to access a lot of the components of the Raspberry Pi. Because it just sits inside of there. In this particular model, you take the keyboard off, and there's a rail here that you can put a breadboard on. But they don't have to deal with, hey, well, there's this thing here, and I'm looking at my monitor here. It's as though you're giving them a really cheap laptop. Now, granted, this is V2. That's why I haven't seen this particular one before. I'm only familiar with the V1, but that's a lot. But there are variations on this type of device that are really darn cheap.
Well, from my point of view, it's not a lot if I'm not giving it away. If I'm taking 10 of those into a class, and at the end of the class, 8 of them still work, and I can use them for the next class, I can live with that. I've been in business a long time, and had a couple of startups. It's time to pay back one way or another. So, but I'm, listening to you, and I'm learning so much new stuff because I was stuck in the dark ages because they wouldn't upgrade past Python 2.7 because that's what came on the Linux box we use.
Yep.
And they didn't want to hear it. It wasn't installed with the vendor. Didn't want to hear it. Now it's changed. I've got Windows clients, and things are more flexible.
You reminded me something of that this is a brand new Python 3.6 feature. Well, brand new as of Python 3.7 is out now, but relatively brand new Python 3.6. For a while, let's say I have a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if I want to do variable unpacking or list unpacking for variable assignment, I can do this is A, B, C, D, E, and those all get assigned to all the different items in that list. Just like we were doing before, we were only doing with 2 items, but now we're doing with 5. As long as the numbers match, then you're not going to have a problem. But let's say we have an arbitrary number of items in this list. Just for argument's sake, I'm going to do range of -5 to 20. Just put some variety in there. And also, by the way, because that's a generator, I need to convert to a list first. It's going to give you that. But let's say, as we know that we're pretty much always going to get 5 back. Let's say we've already checked that it's greater than some number that we need. We are only in like maybe args. Let's say we're only interested in assigning the first, the second, the first and second, and then we can keep all the rest in a list. We can do that by assigning A, B, star, C. If we run that, A is 1 or -5. That's right. B is -4, and C is the list of everything else, up to but not including 20. That's not the new thing. And by that star, you can put at the beginning and and assign things from the end and that kind of thing. The new thing as of 3.6 is to then say I also want to take out the one on the last. So you can do a variable length assignment operator within a list of other within other assignments. And if we do A is again -5. B, D is the last one, and C is now everything else that we didn't explicitly assign already.
Amazing.
I think that's just cool.
Yeah, when you're going to unpack various logs in the system, you only care about a few things. The rest is garbage. Lovely.
And from a Python standpoint, let's say we saw earlier with the double star for kwargs, take all of my keyword arguments and put them into a dictionary. Just like we're doing with this assignment operator, saying take these and put them into here, we can do the opposite and say if we have a function, let's just call it foo, we're going to do that. We're going to do our args and kwargs thing again. And let's just return a tuple of args and kwargs. Super simple. We're just returning whatever gets handed to it. So if I call foo of 1, it's going to return a tuple of 1 because that's the arg, and then we gave it no kwarg, so just an empty dictionary. If we do it with that, it gives us that. Let's say keyword arguments can be anything, so yeah, good old test equals true. Dictionary has test, key test equals true. Let's say that we had a ton of code that by looking up variables that it was given, let's say we eventually created a dictionary that has test equals true, and we calculated this environment key was 1, or let's say we converted it to an int of 1, or whatever. And those are now the options that we wish to feed into our function, rather than doing a bunch of if-then statements and applying to variables that we then just say, true equals whatever we end up calculating as a variable that we're never going to use again. we can do foo and expand our ops into keyword arguments, and it takes it just like that. I can give it, let's do our good old range converted to a list from -5 to 20 before. If we do that, this argument is a tuple with a single item in it of a list of 25 items. If I put a star in front of that, it is now just a tuple of all of the items that were contained in that list. So there are very few places in Python that you can use the star, but they can be very powerful for both packing, unpacking, and I guess in that from module import star, it's technically just implicitly unpacking everything that would be imported as though it were a list of things to be imported. So it can be pretty powerful.
I had a case where I had to unpack a bunch of keyword args and make self-dot whatevers, attributes typically.
Mm-hmm.
And the way at the time was self-dot, dunder dict equals, and then star key words. Got to learn your new words. I've only learned this stuff from text online. I don't know how to say it. And has Python improved on a way to do that, to take a string of keywords and just put them into the class? Because that's kind of, using
so
dict is kind of a dirty pool.
I don't know if it's been improved upon. I think I know of a more Pythonic way of doing so, or potentially doing so. Let's say we have a class op, and we have an init method that always takes itself, but also this just has queries in it. Oh, thank you. I see you. Yeah, we're a little 20 minutes over. This will be the last one. And just, let's put our annotation in there. Quarks is going to end up being a dictionary. And init never returns anything, in code at least. I believe there's setAttr, getAttr, hasAttr functions that are native core Python. I believe you would be able to do for KV, tuple unpacking, in quargs.items. setAttr self, I think it's then key name and then value. And so if we then go say op equals op and give it a equals 1, b equals 2. There we go.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
Quick variation
One
on
more
this.
line of code and we'll clean.
Quick variation on this. Say you define like A and C or something like that, and you want to filter out B. Is there a way that you can do like within the for loop, if K is in the non-function properties of this class?
You can do whatever logic you want inside of this. It's just saying, hey, here's a dictionary of quarks.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's...
I'm looking at, do you know how you would grab the non-member functions, like just what the properties themselves that we're expecting are?
I've done it, God, it was 20 years ago, but there is a way to differentiate between a member function and a pure function. I've forgotten it. I had hair back then.
As you were saying, it's like a dirty pool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not really, because I've
like-
had cases where I had to go through and pull out valid production use cases where I had to differentiate between class methods or instance methods is the right term, and plain functions. And I think what I was doing some automatic code generation. And so there is a way to do it. I forgot. It's just too long ago.
I was wondering if it was just going to be something else.
Like if you were to do dir of op.
Well, yeah. If you do dir op, you're going to see all of the things that were given. And op doesn't actually have any custom methods on
Can
it.
we do lowercase?
It's well, there's A and B. What you could do is if you wanted to see a difference as to things that have been added since, you can run diff on dir op and dir instance of op.
Oh, that's a really nice clean way to do that.
So anything that has been added beyond the original, code compiling version of that class will not be in the uninstantiated version because we made those changes in init.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. Because, like, in that, you would still be able to do, like, if you were to define it, we could do the difference between the self versus the, because in one case you have objects, but you might also have, like, your test case, you can say, that will give you a difference between what is being created within this one versus.
Yeah.
I like that. That makes sense.
You could even create a method on whatever class you want to do op.diff and give it another instance of the same class, and then have it return whatever things that one has that the current one doesn't, as a helper function.
I like that.
So in that case, it would be diff dir. Whatever the diff function is, it might be like list.diff or something like that, or function tools. But diff dir self, comma, dir whatever op, whatever other instance of it was.
Awesome, cool. Like that's been a bit of a problem. That's been bugging me for a couple months. So that's I really like that idea.
Yeah, you put the keys into sets and then go look at the set manually and find which keys changed. That doesn't tell you the data changed.
There's also, if you also want to make sure that nothing can be added using set adder, there's Dunder Slots, which improves memory because it explicitly, like you say, Dunder Slots, and here's the name, here's a list of all of the methods and variables and all the things that could be in my adders.
Mm-hmm.
And by specifying that, it locks down your class specification so things can't be added by anything after the fact, and it also improves code speed at runtime because now there's I don't remember what little flips they do in the back, but it then gets treated like a static implementation, which is always faster than dynamic.
So you'd be naming the methods that you've defined in your class.
Yeah.
And by doing the Dunder Slots, you've locked them down.
Yeah.
Java.
I forget the exact syntax because I haven't really had I haven't had a good use case of doing so, but yeah, in that case, we might. I think it gives you some things like your init and whatnot, but anything that is there, like you just type it in there, and now it does some magic speed improvements. It was a huge thing 2 years ago when that really started being used.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll find some good docs for it online. But yeah, this was cool. Started talking about some tests and whatnot, and just spent 80% of the time just going down some awesome rabbit holes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming out.
Like, I mean, I
We'll
figured
go ahead and stop
Dunder
this.
is also totally
Bye.